In this episode of The Alternate Path, I speak to Tian, who's the current director of product at Afterpay, which is now part of Block. We spoke about his journey and what his training regimen was like, making his first million in poker. Yes, poker. The decision-making framework he had is really interesting, and it's relevant for both life in general and investing. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that part of the conversation. Then we switch gears and talk about what learnings he took from his poker journey to building a startup in China and ultimately in his professional career so far. On top of all of that, I asked Tian, how does someone working in a company go from good to great? And his answer was simple yet profound. I am your host, Dave Quan. Please enjoy my conversation with Tian. So, Tian, I think a really good place to actually start our conversation is that I'm going to paste a snippet on the screen. It goes, my friend was convinced that I would make it big on poker stars. So he gave me $50 and an hour lesson in Hold'em. 6 months later, I had 100,000. 3 years later, I had made a million and saved my family from poverty. What was it about you that he was convinced of that you could make it in professional poker?
Yeah, good question. So my friend and I we used to be semi-pro Warcraft 3 players. We used to be teammates and we were on Team Australia. And I kept missing practice. So the real story to that is I kept missing practice because I was working at Outback Steakhouse, this steak restaurant. So he was just like, why are you working? And I'm like, well, I need money. So he said that a lot of the traits of a good gamer can translate into being a good Hold'em player as well. Like, especially because I wasn't very good in the micro aspect, and probably my strengths were in the strategic, tactical kind of planning side of things. So yeah, like the $50, we started at 1 cent, 2 cent, which for people who play Texas Hold'em means the small blind is 1 cent and the big blind is 2 cents. And typically you buy in for 100 big blinds. So we started at like $2 buy-ins. And the lessons were basically more around discipline, around hand ranges, around understanding bankroll management. I think the actual game strategy itself, I think, yeah, you learn as you play.
So just for everyone else's sake, can you explain a little bit more about micro versus like the strategy side? I assume that there's a lot of like non-gamers out there.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. In gaming, micro refers to controlling individual units. And like, for example, in Warcraft, it would be like making sure your grunts didn't die and that your catapults were hitting caster units, which does more damage, right? It's like small, minute controls that make your battle efficient. And macro or strategic decisions are more about when am I going to focus on my economy and when am I going to focus on my army? When should I be taking fights? Do I have a weaker army? Should I be like raiding his kind of economy first or should I fight? And, you know, what hero choices am I going? Like things like that.
So I want to dig a little deeper into that 1 hour session that you got. What did you learn about poker?
I think the 1 hour is probably too. It wasn't like a proper like, hey, you pay a professional and he like teaches you a course and magically you're better. Like this was a very good friend and he's still one of my best mates. And he's also probably the smartest person I've ever met. And what he really taught me about Texas Hold'em was that it's really about being rational and staying unemotional and deciphering out the signals from the noise. So one example of that, I think many people misunderstand the game and they think, oh, like it's all about tells, right? That's why you wear like sunglasses and you like have a scarf and so you don't see people's, so you don't expose your neck twitches. It's like, it's not like that at all. Like Texas Hold'em is more about, all of that is generally noise. It's more about betting patterns, what hands are shown on the river, on the showdown. So you can actually work backwards and figure out, okay, what kind of hands are people raising with from what positions? What are they calling? What are they re-raising? And then through a process of logical, let's say, eliminations, you can say, hey, when this opponent gets to this position on the river, he doesn't have these hands and he's more likely to have these other hands. And therefore my hand is better X percentage of the time. And if it's enough, then you make a decision on, do I call this bet? Do I re-raise? Do I fold?
Interesting.
And I think like that lesson, there's the bit I mentioned earlier about bankroll management and about like emotional tilt control is the word. And yeah, it's like there are people who are very smart and very good and they might be able to make the right decision like 75% of the time or whatever. But if they don't have the emotional control, if they don't use bankroll management, then you'll still go bust if you play high enough stakes. I mean, the human condition is how the casinos can actually profit. We make irrational decisions that are minus EV, and we continue. Yeah. So yeah, the final, probably the most, to sum that up, I would say what he really imparted on me about Texas Hold'em is actually he was able to connect Hold'em to how I've always viewed life, is to make the best decision with whatever information you have on hand, and the best decision being defined by making the most plus EV decision. EV as an expected value. So, for example, there is an EV in folding, right? There's an EV in calling a bet. There's an EV in raising a bet. So your question is to figure out, okay, what is the best decision to make in that moment? Yeah.
The expected value part is super interesting to me because that's something that I thought it was a bit odd when I started doing a lot of that at work, that like every decision that we make, whether on the SEO side or just how we make decisions generally, I go with some kind of probability, with some kind of expected value, because then you can quantitatively judge, like if we were to take this path, what would be the EV? What if take this path, what would be the EV? And then like it just makes it easier to make a like somewhat of a, not a guess, but like more like a logical decision. So when you talked about it, I had that moment. I was like, oh, so I'm not like, I thought I was just odd.
I think most people do it for everything. I think many people refer to it as like first principles thinking as well in some ways. Like you go down to the basics and you go, okay, what should I do? Right? What's the most logical and rational decision from first principles? And yeah, like you do it for everything. Like it can be as small as not getting ice in your boba. That's minus CV because you get less boba, but you make sure you ask the person to shake it in the ice shaker, right? So it's still cold. It could be like a big one, like when you renovate or when you purchase a house, right? I had to make this decision, which is like, hey, what's the chance of the council approving this design versus this other design? And most people will be like finger in the air, like, oh, this would be all right or whatever. But how do you know? So you can actually go back into the council websites and look through all the approved DAs and the rejected DAs and figure out, okay, which ones were rejected and what's the chance of approval and chance of rejection. And you can multiply that by like what your cost basis is and so on. And then you figure out a number, which is expected value. Then you determine, do I have the bankroll to take the worst case hit? And if so, then you go with the most plus EV decision. So you like do it in everything. Like recently in the job career change as well, you do the same, right? Like offer one, offer two versus, starting a YouTube channel. Like what's the most plus EV? And you can use hourly rate as, let's say, your primary metric.
We're going to talk about that in just a bit. And I think let's want to refocus on the poker side because the career side is super interesting. I don't want to get sidetracked. So going back to the initial poker journey, what was that training regimen like once you got started, going from $50 like of earnings to your first 100,000? And then I'll have a follow-up question after that.
Yeah, I think earlier on, I was still very skeptical. I just saw it as a new game to play. Actually, I was beyond skeptical because brought up in an Asian family, like gambling is like very taboo and very bad. So I almost like waited for like the whole family to be asleep and then snuck on. And then because of my trust in my friend, I decided to give it a go. But initially, it was like very little playing, questioning the ethics of it all, and still played. And then I think my competitive nature was the one that started my regimen. So it went from like an hour a day to like when I was making, let's say that 100K, it would have been like 7-8 hours a day of playing, and then more time spent on reviewing the decisions and the bad blow ups and the good hands. And then so it got serious towards the end.
Is there an element in terms of like you'll focus on that one thing first, like a part of your strategy first, or is it more like in the beginning is more around just getting your reps in, like getting used to making decisions relatively quickly?
No, 100% not. I would say that for a beginner that's looking to get into Texas Hold'em, you should definitely start with playing as few tables as possible, like maybe one, obviously, to start, and then play 4, and then really focus on your micro of the game. Make sure you're paying attention to every hand that's going on the table and every player before you start like putting in the reps. Because when you scale up a terrible strategy, you lose a lot of money very, very quickly. Yeah.
Okay. So then from that, going from 100K to $1 million, how did that training regimen change?
I think, yeah. So I mentioned earlier, you start with the $2 buy-in or sometimes $5 buy-in, right? So you can level up if you hit a win rate and the win rate is defined by the number of big blinds that you win per 100 hands. And you can use statistical modeling to work out the confidence that you'll win in the future based on your past performance. And poker is a little bit like trading as well. Like the past doesn't really indicate the future, but it does. It's a strong suggestion if the metagame doesn't change. So you progress up the stakes as you maintain your win rate or even improve your win rate. Yeah. And then you take shots. And I also mentioned bankroll management. So there's a mathematical theorem called the Kelly criterion. It's a complicated calculation which basically says, based on what your win rate and what the variance is, how many buy-ins do you need to attempt the next challenge? So you can imagine I started with $50. The buy-in was $2. I had like 25 buy-ins, right? To attempt the next one, let's say it's $5. And in order to keep 25 buy-ins, I needed my bankroll to hit a certain number. So by the time my bankroll was 100K, I was playing $1,000 buy-ins. And if you maintain a win rate at $1,000 buy-ins, then you start making serious money. The regimen of changing, I think I was just way more focused. I had a very clear end goal in mind. So my goal for myself was to be a self-made millionaire before I was 30. And I chose poker to do that. And because you have that end goal in mind, you work out, well, how much money do you need to make every year? You can include compound interest. I didn't. And then you work out, well, how many hands, what's my win rate? How many hands do I need to be playing at a certain stake? And that translates to how many tables and how many hours a day I need to be playing. And working backwards, you figure out how much you need to do. And then if you're not going so well, that's when you start doubting yourself. Well, did I choose the right game? Am I playing enough? Do I need to lower the stakes and increase the hands and so on? So there's lots of ways that you can change your regimen.
It's surprising how similar it sounds when it comes to both life and investing. Just that general thinking that having a very clear outcome will set you on a path that's much better to not knowing what the outcome is and you just focusing on the journey, if you will, because you'll always be on the journey if you don't know what the destination is, right?
Well, where are you journeying to if you don't have a destination? You're on somebody else's journey. If you don't have a goal in mind, you get taken for a ride. You might get lucky and you might like follow a good person's journey and it's exciting and meaningful for you. But generally speaking, if you don't have your own goal, then you're fulfilling someone else's goals.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think from the bankroll management side, just from what you've mentioned in terms of having a strategy that could potentially scale and then you get your reps in, what are some of the important things that you have learned beyond that while playing professional poker that was relevant to your career? Because I feel like there are some things, like you said, it's probably relevant to life in general in terms of having the outcome, knowing how to approach that outcome. But what are some of the other things that was useful from your poker journey that you applied to your career?
Yeah, there were so many. First of all, I want to clarify, I'm not a professional poker player. I'm a casual enthusiast of the game. Okay. Yeah, but I think there were too many. I think the biggest lesson which we covered was the expected value lesson. And I can go into a little bit deeper. I think most people who haven't encountered poker don't really understand what expected value really means to make expected value decisions. Most people are more in real life, more results oriented. Even in business, most people will say, well, last year I made X money, therefore I was a good investor, or I got a promotion, therefore I'm a good worker, or they make a judgment on their previous decision based on an outcome. And in the poker world, that is a really bad thing. Like we call it results-oriented thinking, and fish do that. Fish are bad players. Yeah, that's something I've very carried forward into other aspects of life. Like you shouldn't be making a judgment on if you made the right decision based on current information, because you didn't have that information. And the world as we know it could be deterministic or probabilistic, but for all intents and purposes, for people like me, for like laymen, it's probabilities. So when I was making a decision, I think the intention and knowing the information at the time and making the best decision you can is really important. Now, why that's been helpful and practical in my life is because it helps you move on and it helps you not dwell, right? Like you make, for example, last night I bought the dip in Ethereum and it went down, right? And a fish would be like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Whereas I'd be like, look, the Tian, like 2 nights ago, I can't actually remember the exact time I bought it, but I made a set of decisions based on the information at the time. And I thought, well, I could have bought the dip there. lots of things. Making a career decision that pans out poorly, you might blame yourself and dwell on it for too long. And likewise, if you make a decision, and let's say you make a decision that was actually phenomenally stupid at the time, but turns out to be wonderful, like let's say you bought a lottery ticket, that's the best example, and you won the jackpot, you'd be like, oh, I'm such a genius. Like, I'm the best. That was the best decision of my life to buy the lottery ticket. But with enough repetition, it was actually a very negative EV decision to purchase a lottery ticket, playing the slots, whatever it is. Yeah, so that has been immensely helpful in being able to not dwell on decisions, make decisions quickly, and move on from them, and also hold yourself accountable to making the best, most plus EV decision rather than the result.
I'm glad we're talking about this because I think most people would not think about it like managing life like a set of probabilities that things happen. So you talked a little bit about some of the most important things you carried forward from your casual enthusiast poker journey onto your career. I was hoping to ask you that in meeting some of these elite players, what was their perception of money and how did that differ from yours?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it was very culturally driven. I think everyone that was at my level was they were quite technically sound, if you get what I mean, but we still had very different views of life. And I think that does have a slight impact on our strategies that we employ. So the level I reached, I would say, is like I was very good in my prime, but I think there was a gap between myself and I would say the true legends of the game. Like, let's say Phil Ivey is a name that really, even I think even his online reputation doesn't speak to how crazy that guy works. Like, and for him, it's not work, it's true passion. I remember at the World Series, I can't remember which year, but I made it to like day 7 and he made it to day 7. And right after like an 11-hour grind or something, I'm like headed up to the hotel room. Let's go grab something to eat with, friends and rest and get ready for the next day. But I saw him walking into Bobby's room, like Harola's room, just to keep playing again. I mean, I don't know, like maybe he thinks in the same way and he's about like maximizing EV and making money and all this stuff. But I felt it wasn't like that with him. I felt he was just like, he just loved the game. The difference is I saw poker as a way to achieve my other goal of, like I mentioned, being a millionaire before a certain age. So I love the competition, but I don't know if I loved the game as much as some of these other legends really did. And not all of them are very good at poker. Many of them are better at marketing themselves. I think the true people, I think the true people that were really good at poker really loved the game and was at the same time very technical. Yeah. And the perception of money, I think it depends more about less if you're a poker player or not, and more about the environment that you grew up in. So I'm generally pretty conservative when it comes to money. There are players that have made huge bankrolls because they leveraged, let's say, played the nosebleed stakes. They didn't care about bankroll management, but they were like savants when it came to the micro of the game. And a lot of the poker players would be gambling like 100K a hole and when they're playing golf. I don't do that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I think people still had very different perceptions on money. But the overall is like your bankroll, the money that is inside your poker account or what you use for poker. I would say everyone saw that as a tool to compete. So I didn't see that as money. That was a tool to compete for points, which then you can withdraw into real money.
It's super interesting in terms of the difference between a very elite player in terms of treating the game as something that they just love doing. It's not even about money at that point.
Yeah. I felt that was a distinction. Yeah.
So in a way, to accumulate a certain amount of wealth, there are different pathways that we could take. But to create a generational level of wealth, then it's almost like something that you do would need to be something that you love doing anyway. And the wealth was a subsequent result of being really good at whatever it is that you love doing.
And getting very lucky. Very, very lucky, right? I think wealth is like talking about what is money or wealth or value. It's like a medium of value. Like it's something that you can store and propagate value into the future. So, and what that means is you can only make value by helping other people or things that have value. Right? You have to provide more value than you take from them. Otherwise, you
Mm.
can't get mega rich. Yeah. So I think that's like the way, and the way you can create the most value, and at the same time, you're competing with all these other people that are trying to create value, is
Mm.
by being able to like stay in the game, right? So it's like picking the game that you love and sticking to
That,
it.
that is so true. That is so true. It's the whole starting the YouTube channel thing. There's part of me that like the income that I generated, that sounds good, but like the whole process of creating the video and learning more about it, that's probably more exciting and also more painful all at the same time. And I think that this is actually a really good segue to my next question, because you went down this very on brand alternate path to making your first million.
Mm.
And it's been a while now. And given all of your new professional experiences and a startup, where we'll talk about in just a second, how would you approach making your first million if you were to start again?
Wow. It's a good question. I would say if I were to start today and I was like younger without so much responsibility, I would still be trying to find things that were competitive and at the cutting edge. So not many people knew about it. So I'll give a contrast. Like chess has been around for a long time, right? And there are
Mm,
exceptionally smart people in there that I could never beat.
mm,
And the prize money for chess is tiny. So I
mm,
wouldn't start there. Poker at the time had this weird effect because of online poker. It was easier to play online. And I think Chris Moneymaker had just won the World Series and a lot of people were rushing into the game. Then if you were, disciplined, hardworking, and you had a good strategy, then you could make bank. What comes to mind now in today's climate, I think, is like there's probably a lot of opportunity in crypto and Web3. There's probably a lot of opportunity in learning how to code.
mm,
Everything's being like automated. You can find immense scale there. There's going to be a lot of opportunity in like these developing economies as well. Like, hey, like all of our ancestors, right? Like we immigrated to Australia, America from Asia to
mm.
find opportunity. And then there are explorers that go from all sorts of the world to uncharted places to find new wealth. So do that. Like, why are you so comfortable in Australia? Like, just buy a ticket, or maybe not in this environment in COVID, but when this blows over, like, go to Africa, start a business there, go to like Indonesia, go to like places that are like growing super quickly and figure
Mm.
out if you can take some of your skills and apply your discipline and strategy and make something, right? Yeah.
That's cool. Firstly, agreeing with the fact that if the value of winning or be at the top of a certain category is so difficult and the value so small, it's like the expected value isn't quite there to go for it in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. And then finding these special opportunities where like the competition is just starting to rise. Everyone is still like, we don't really know what we're doing in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So the strategy isn't quite set in stone. That's both relevant for life and investing at the same time. After all of those successes, and after working in a bigger company, you started your own company called Shu.
Yeah, it's
And
actually a Chinese startup. Yeah, called
yeah,
Gong
and
Jing. Yeah,
that's even more interesting. So I think
yeah.
the first question is why move into startups? And then the follow-up question after that is what was that inspiration behind starting Shu?
I've always been a gamer, right? With the Warcraft gaming, with Diablo, StarCraft, all the Blizzard games,
You're
basically,
naming
right?
all
Yeah.
the
No, I mean, I don't have time to play it now, but at that time, a couple of key events was happening. Like Uber was taking off, right? So like a Uber for X was
Mhm,
like the predominant theme. Another thing was happening was the 4G internet was being rolled out in China. And then another thing was mobile phones were like super powerful or becoming to be super powerful. And also penetration was everyone was changing their crappy phones into better Huawei and Xiaomi and Samsung and iPhones. And then from what I knew about gaming, like the thesis was generally like gaming esports is a one-to-one match with sports, in the sense that in traditional sports you would have had media companies like ESPN. In
mhm,
esports you had Twitch. In
mhm,
traditional sports you had like Nike and Adidas. In esports you had Razer, right? Razer keyboards. And so you had media, you had hardware, you had gambling, right? And so we thought the one gap that was left was around coaching and services. So in traditional sports, you had like PGA certified golf coaching lessons, or you had like communities of golfers and clubs and that golf together. So we try to do that, and we try to be the services platform for gamers to buy and sell coaching, boosting items, this sort of stuff. Yeah, we all quit our jobs and we went to Shanghai and started the business. And yeah, the journey was interesting. Like raising money was hard, hiring people was hard. In China, especially, because in China, I think people were generally a bit more conservative. All the top graduates wanted to go into, at the time, we called it BAT, so Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And it's
Yeah.
very hard to convince engineers to join that like crappy startup in the share space. Yeah, we ultimately got to decent scale. Like at our peak, we got to like 40,000 users downloads a day, but we had a lot of trouble monetizing it. We actually did well in content. Like we have a YouTube channel that has 110,000 subscribers that you can link to, but I haven't updated the content for ages. Yeah, we exited from the business, so we haven't updated it much. And then we have a Chinese TikTok, so Douyin channel with like 3
Yeah.
million followers. So it's like it got to decent scale, but it was very hard to monetize. The key lesson I learned from that was in China, like consumer spending and in Western world is very different. And I think that was my failure. I grew up, I was born in China, but I grew up in Australia. And I think I failed to recognize how different the consumer spending is. So in Australia, like whether you're men or woman or child or elderly, you had pretty strong spending power in the sense that a lot of money was spent by men for men's products. But in China, if you look up the numbers, top of the consumer spending is going to be like young single women. Then it's going to be for the elderly, for kids, for women, and men were at the absolute bottom. And men that were under 18, a lot of the gamers, they spent. You're very forced to save money because you need to set yourself financially up, and trying to squeeze money from that segment, it was impossible. Yeah, so you're in marketing, you'd understand that, right? Like the LTV of different demographics is very different. And that was our failing. Like we were able to actually acquire users for just under 5 yuan, but getting them to spend more than 5 yuan. And then 5 yuan sounds like it's just $1, but it's so hard. It's so hard to get them to spend. Yeah.
So monetization was the biggest issue.
Yeah.
And now knowing how big YouTube is, would that have changed your monetization strategy? That knowing
Yeah,
that,
I think we did like just infinite mistakes. Yeah, but at the time it's like, yeah, I'm trying to go back to the expected value, right? It's like you pick a path that's the highest expected value. And at the time we were definitely going after the Uber for X model. So the service was the key, not the content. The content was how you brought people onto the platform, but we were trying to create liquidity of service providers and service buyers. I think that assessment was failed because I didn't look into consumer spending enough. And also for the second lesson, I would say is that games where sports and games are different is soccer is generational, basketball is generational, cricket is generational. You'll see parents take their kids to games, whereas like, hey, like who's still playing Warcraft 3 now? It's
yeah,
a game.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was another thing. So every time there was a new game, we had to reacquire a bunch of users. It was really hard to keep up with how quickly things were changing. But I think like knowing what I know now, so which means I know I didn't choose the most plus AV path. I think content would have been a better play. There's a very good company that's still thriving called, my friend founded that in Beijing. So they chose to go the content and community path rather than the monetization path. And they're doing far better as a result. There's another path that was very focused on digital skins. I thought that was a better path as well in esports. Like C5 Gaming, yeah, who were partners of ours as well. They have their own challenges, but I think, yeah, they had a different business model that worked.
On the topic of gaming skins, it seems like there's an evolution of that moving towards NFTs. Is there actually value or is this more hyped? The current way of being presented NFTs makes me feel like I don't feel like I'm missing out because like when we talk about art and like
Yeah.
and things going to like a couple $1 million, for me it just feels like where exactly is the value of this? But then when you talk about skins and NFTs from that perspective, Is there something actually there?
It's a very big question. I'll try and break it down because I actually did do a bunch of studying here. There was a recent opportunity to join a very promising startup in the space in Sydney called a company called Immutable. But yeah, so they're very much in this space. And my general thesis on NFT at the moment is that it's way too speculative. And my thesis is this is right. Like, first of all, what is the value of a skin? Where does that come from? And I would say you can break that down into two components.
Mm,
One is the collective value of, let's say it's a skin of a gun in CSGO.
mm,
You prescribe value, or the market prescribes value to that gun because everyone enjoyed the game. It's like a memento, defines your character in the game. That's why you want to pay $50 for that skin, let's say. And there's another component which I think is way too overpriced right now, which is the speculative value, which
mm,
is people that maybe they don't even play the game. They're just like, oh, NFTs, like, let's get on this hype train so I don't, miss out. And I think that part is the predominant part of today's
mm,
world. I think NFTs that will do well will be the ones that have not just the community, but the actual game, whether it's the game or the organization that it's associated with, that has to have a lot of value. And then the collection value goes up, right? So, like, let's say
mm,
the crypto punks or whatever are like, what is that community doing? Not just the community can't just have interesting people, which I think is the trend now, like all these like A-list people buying it. I don't think that does it. I think the actual community has to have done something that's very value generating for society, and then as a result there's collection value. There's, you remember it. It's the same thing as like sports memorabilia.
mm,
We buy it because a certain team won certain championships or broke certain records, and then you buy the baseball, you buy the basketball, the signed ball, because that conjures up the collection value. Yeah, back to that company Immutable I was talking about, is I think that's one of the few companies in that space that's going to be creating real value because they have a
mm,
use case that is very real in the gaming space, in minting these skins. And I'll try and elaborate a little bit, right? Like what NFTs and what Web3 does, I think maybe all your viewers will know this better than I do, is that it creates a new kind of creator economy or
mm,
liquidity economy, in the sense that if I were an artist previously and I spent hundreds of hours painting this painting, the way I make that profitable or plus EV for me is I have to sell it for a high price, higher than what I deem as my hourly rate, let's say, in a very rational
mm,
stance. So then the auction becomes very important, that it auctions for the highest price possible. But in the
mm,
creator economy, that's less important. What's important is I love what I create and I create more of it. And because the initial sale price isn't as important, because I can collect royalties, I can collect based on smart contracts a percentage of the resale value in the future.
mm.
So it's way more friendly. It smooths out the earning potential for creators. And I think for creators and owners alike, I would say, but more so for creators. And then why that's applicable in gaming and in general, the metaverse, I would say, is like, imagine if you were the designer that created the most aesthetic brick that you can build virtual worlds with. You don't
Okay.
need to sell that brick for $100 million. You can sell it for like a cent, but like the use, maybe there's a per use royalty fee that goes back to you, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that creates business models, and I think companies that mint NFTs, and the companies that take a clip from resell and create marketplaces like OpenSea, like IMX, like a
Mm.
whole bunch of others, I think are solving real problems and are adding real value, and not so much on the speculation side.
I have more questions around Korea, but before we actually talk about that, while we're on the topic of metaverse, I wanted to ask you, is there legs in this whole idea of metaverse, or is it just mostly hyped right now? Because like a couple months ago, before Facebook changed the meta, that wasn't even a topic. Ever since they changed, like the whole world shifted to like, oh, it's
Yeah.
metaverse. Is there legs?
Of course there is, I think, but it's just like any other technological breakthrough. It goes in these cycles, right? It's like nobody's talking about it, then there's this mega hype, everyone's talking about it, and
Mm-hmm.
then quiet us down, and the companies that most will fail, 99% of the initiatives will fail, and then 1% that survive, people will forget about them, and then they do this massive breakthrough. And that's been the same whether it's early kind of .com, it's the same.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about metaverse in the sense of like we're in some virtual reality, or our identity matters in our virtual reality, we already care about it, right? Like you care about the number of subscribers and views that's on your YouTube. That is part of your metaverse. It's not your physical body. So we're already tuned to that. Like people care about their LinkedIn profiles, and what they say on LinkedIn is very different to what they say in real life, and so on, right? So
Yeah.
we're already in there. So it's like investing in the metaverse. What does that mean? Like if you're talking about VR and AR, I think that's a very different discussion to what we just talked about, like Web3. I think there's going to be multiple metaverses. I think you can, as an investor, you can either choose to bet on one or the other. Like you can bet on kind of Ethereum, you can bet on Meta, or you can bet on the hardware and infrastructure layer that powers it, NVIDIA, or like chips or cloud computing, things like that. I think maybe the question is the metaverse accelerating? Maybe that's a better way to think about it. Like maybe that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, right? Like when you look at the QQQ index, let's say, you can see the last 10 years has been this massive bull run. That's an indication that technology is, if you think the markets are efficient, that's an indication that technology is accelerating, and thus like the metaverse is accelerating. If you think that's going to even accelerate even higher, then I think you can pick winners. Yeah, that's my feel on the metaverse, I think.
This is a really good time, because now that you brought it up, I want to talk more about career progression, because you went from a casual enthusiast, a very good casual enthusiast poker player, to building your own startup. That was, in my eyes, that was successful. A lot of people would never get to this stage, especially like building a company overseas. That wouldn't even exist. And then you have been VP product for other companies, and now you're director of product in Afterpay, which is now part of Block, used to be called Square. I think one of the main thing for me that I wanted to ask is, from all of the people that you worked with in the past, what makes someone great as talent and what makes someone good? Because I think there is a distinction, and then the people who are maybe great for the company will progress a little bit faster compared to people who are just.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know if progression is the best metric to see if someone is great. Yeah, because it really depends on the company that you join. Like if you're the only sane person in the crazy world, you're not going to progress. So I think I was quite fortunate to have like joined some companies that really believed in the same things that I believed in, and then also some companies that maybe one or two that did not. I think it really depends on who you surround yourself with. So I think the separation between, first of all, good and great, what I'm saying is it depends on the mission of the company, the definition of good. So some companies will have a system that encourages exploration and open-mindedness and creativity, and some companies will foster a value around like being safe and conservative and planning and so on. And different companies achieve different results based on their bigger system that they're part of. If you're let's say a law firm that's advising inside finance or whatever, you'd have to hope that people there are mainly like conservative and not. Do you know what I mean? So you don't fail. That it depends on the climate, the bigger system around you. But for me, like I've always tried to choose businesses that aligned, like their mission really speaks to me. And I think if the mission really speaks to you, then you're more likely to do great work by their definition, by yours, because the definition is the same or similar. I think like good and great, another difference is like, it's not really intelligence anymore, because I think a lot of these tech companies, they have screens for general competence, right? Like some do like some test that's similar to an IQ test. Some others will give you like technical questions, like take home exams. So what I'm trying to say is there's no like really incompetent people in any of these companies. So what then that comes down to is it's more about your attitude, how aligned you are to your team, and communication, and how you solve disagreements between members of the team or functions within the company.
Mm.
And if you have those abilities, everyone's smart already. That's a given. If you work in tech, you're already like really smart. And then, so then it's like, it's not about like hiring the smartest person. It's not about hiring the most qualified. It's about like hiring the person that believes in the same mission that you do. It's going to work hard towards that vision. And then like, if there's a disagreement about something, having people in the business that can compromise and redirect people's energy towards the goal again. So those are the great people, are the ones that are smart, but then also their mission really, like, they get excited about that mission, and then they can take it to the next level. And then there's a lot of luck, right?
Yeah. I think luck is such an underrated element, like in terms of like great timing and so on and so forth. I think like on the intellectual like prowess side, like the whole idea of being smart, it's like when you're in the industry, most people are actually like they're very smart. Like it's like already everyone has that. So then the next question then becomes like, are you actually interested in the company's mission or the team that you're going in, or do you just want a job? Because then like if you just want a job,
then you're just good.
Like you never, like going back to the earlier part of the conversation, it's like if you enjoy what you do, like for example, if you're Ivey, then you put in necessary reps to become great, right? It's like you already love it. Like, so then it's like nothing stopping you to
it's
become.
like why do I want to go eat and sleep when I could be doing the thing that I love the most?
Yeah, you can't stop thinking about it.
Like when you have a lot of people talk about like great work-life balance. It is important, but it's even better if what you do is what you love. Then it's just like life balance, dude.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
It is your life, right? Like if you're like imagine working on FSD at any of these like Tesla or Waymo or whatever, and that is what you're interested in. There is no work-life balance to you. It's life balance. You wake up and you're like, oh, I need to solve this edge case. How do I do it? And it's like exciting to you. If you're like working at, let's say, like Block and Afterpay, right? Like the mission is to create like win economies, right? Is to and how do you make a more equitable like system? If that's like your mission, then that's what you're doing and you enjoy what you're doing. If you're working for Google's mission is to like organize the world's information. And if you're that sort of person that can't stand like things being messy, and how do you like categorize and how do you clean and how do you like cache ideas and systems, then you're going to love it there. So yeah, pick a company where you agree with the mission, and not just agree, like you feel passionately about the mission.
So this is actually a really good segue because you're currently hiring. I know that. And did you want to plug for people who are interested in potentially moving careers? Like, who are you hiring? What are you looking for?
Thank you for the opportunity. So my current role is director of product at Afterpay, but we're soon to be merged with Block. So I look after the checkout product globally. So we're looking for product managers, we're looking for designers, engineers, we're looking for people who want to help us achieve our mission. I think it's a great time to join because I think the merger with Block creates a lot of value that people, probably the public, doesn't really realize yet. I think there are some great articles out there that you can like read and understand, but in general, like if you think about Block on their seller side, so Square, they serve SMBs. They serve like your cafes, right? Your gyms, your salons, and they're more like, let's say, offline focused. Whereas if you look at Afterpay, we're majority online focused and we're serving the enterprise. So from a seller side perspective, there's very little overlap between those, let's say, customer basis segments, which is a good thing. And then on the buyer side, on the Cash App side, you have like a lot of people who are driven by, let's say, they care about investing, they care about Bitcoin, they care about preserving value. They're more like, let's say, into the world of economies and finance, and they care about this sort of stuff. Whereas on Afterpay, we have a lot of people who are into retail and fashion and beauty. Again, very little overlap. But I think with those two systems combined, you can potentially create a strong ecosystem with very strong network effects that's more representative of the global economy. And that's what the ambition of Block is, right? To create a win-win global economy. And I think that presents itself as like an acceleration to both companies' missions. And that's probably the biggest reason why I joined. So yeah, I'm working on one of the projects that's about integrating with Cash App and Afterpay. So it's really exciting time to join.
So I have some fun questions to wrap up our conversation. So I'm just gonna fire them, and you can just answer on top of your head, right? Who's your
Okay.
favorite poker player to watch?
To watch, jeez, watch play the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll go with Phil Ivey.
Craziest thing you've seen creating a company in China?
Craziest thing. Oh, I've seen so many. The company was called OFO,
Okay.
and the founder paid for someone to go to jail on his behalf because he was the legal representative. That company went bust. In China, if you're the legal rep and you do a bunch of things, you have to go to jail. So he paid for someone to go to jail for him. And so they changed the legal. So yeah, that was pretty messed up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. A book you recommend everyone to read?
Ooh, this might be boring, but I think the Three Body Problem or the trilogy by Liu Cixin, which is a sci-fi book that I think connected a lot of human psychology, politics, and general very hard sci-fi. And I thought that was the best book I read last year.
Okay. Okay. Worst advice someone has given you?
That you're perfect the way you are.
Who else do you think it will be really interesting to talk to who have taken an alternate path to life?
For example, the friend that got me into Texas Hold'em, like he went from ex gamer into Google engineer, and now he's like one of the biggest liquidity providers in the cricket betting markets. So I
Okay.
mean, like he's doing very well, like financially. A lot of people, you just don't know. You don't know how well they're. I mean, obviously, you have an inkling, but I think there are many paths. Like that's the great thing about this where the times that we live in, there are just so many alternative paths that you for someone to like actually follow, like has to be a public figure.
No, it doesn't. So, like for example, that friend who's ex-Google engineer now providing liquidity for for cricket betting, that'll be
Yeah,
fun. Like
yeah,
imagine just like talking to someone who's
yeah, for sure. Yeah, my mate, he'd be like, yeah, super interesting to talk to. Yeah,
well. I think this is a really nice way to end our conversation. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation so much today. Thanks, Tian.
yeah. Thanks for your time. Likewise.